Marinero, the Sick Podcast, after the Canadiens beat the Calgary Flames, that big game in Calgary, which was their third of 3 games versus the Calgary Flames. Everyone was hoping that they would get back to Montreal and beat the Toronto Maple Leafs. Well, unfortunately, they didn't. The Canadiens lose by a score of 4-1, and we're going to get to that in just a second. Earlier in the day, on Wednesday morning, the Montreal Canadiens announced that Jonathan Drouin would be taking a leave of absence from the team for personal reasons and asked that his privacy be respected. Drouin, will recall, left the warm-up in the game versus the Calgary Flames, and at the time we were told that he had an injury that was non-COVID related. And so now, a couple of days later, we know what's going on, and so I think I speak for everyone when we say that we wish Jonathan Drouin well. He's been put on LTIR, and so he's going to be out long-term. And everyone's hoping at this point, of course, that he could be back at 100% and join this team in what they hope will be a long playoff push if they make the playoffs. Because with the loss versus the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Canadiens once again now are 6 points up on the Calgary Flames. But now both teams have played the same amount of games, with 8 games remaining in the National Hockey League's regular season for both Montreal and Calgary. Next up for the Montreal Canadiens, they host the Winnipeg Jets on Friday night. But now let's talk about that game versus Toronto. We have to put a couple of things in perspective. Carey Price is out with post-concussion symptoms. Brendan Gallagher, who suffered that fracture in his hand, well, he's out. The good news is that he started practicing yesterday, but he was out of the lineup. Thomas Tatar was out of the lineup. And in my opinion, I think I know when Tatar got hurt. I think it was that game versus the Edmonton Oilers when Connor McDavid split in between Joel Edmondson and Jeff Petrie and scored that goal when he went upstairs on Jake Allen. And if you recall that play, Thomas Tatar got absolutely drilled at the offensive blue line. And I think he got hurt on the play. He was out for a while. He tried to come back, played a game, and now he's out again. And so I think that's exactly when he got hurt. Paul Byron is out with an injury as well. So, I mean, you add it all up. No Price, no Gallagher, no Tatar, no Drouin, and no Byron. So, no number 1 goalie, no top 2 wingers on your line that gets the most minutes. One of your players that has the most assists on the team is out as well. And a player who plays good on the defensive side of the puck, who's got speed, and your lineup could use it, is out as well. So I'll say this. I'll say I'm going to take it easy on the Montreal Canadiens tonight, and I'm going to tell you why. I think the effort was there. I think this team tried. The Canadiens, with a healthy lineup, probably are inferior, I would say are inferior to Toronto with a healthy lineup. Now you take 5 players out of that lineup and you go up against a healthy Toronto team who has their team, with the exception of Freddie Anderson, who, if the playoffs start tomorrow, is probably not going to start in the playoffs for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Not the way Jack Campbell has been playing. By the way, the Leafs, with the win on Wednesday night versus the Canadiens, have clinched the playoff spot, the first team in the North Division to clinch the playoff spot. But look, that doesn't mean that Montreal's game was perfect tonight, because I said the effort was there and they tried. There were some bad mistakes. There clearly were some bad mistakes. And Tyler Toffoli, why would you want to put the Toronto Maple Leafs on the power play as early on in the hockey game as you did? But Toffoli takes a terrible, terrible penalty, and the Toronto Maple Leafs go on the power play. And the way they passed that puck around, and it went from Matthews to Riley to Marner to Nylander, it was the Canadiens, and the movement was not only the passing, but the player movement was absolutely incredible. It's 1 minute and 38 seconds into the hockey game, and the Toronto Maple Leafs already have a 1-0 lead. And then what was it? Just over 7 minutes later, there's a pass from Foligno that goes towards Austin Matthews. It looks like it can be picked off by Nick Suzuki. He can't get to it, or it just goes right off his stick. But the puck first is in the air, and it's batted out of the air by Austin Matthews, who places it inside the post. And just like that, the Toronto Maple Leafs are up on the Montreal Canadiens by a score of 2-0. It's the Sick Podcast, and it's brought to you by MyBookie. Use code SickPicks for a 50% deposit bonus. Bet, win, get paid. You know, you spot Toronto a 2-goal lead after 20 minutes of play. You're without 5 bodies, and at that point, I mean, it looked like, to tell you the truth, that at one point Toronto felt like it was almost somewhat of a scrimmage. And I say that with all due respect to the Canadiens because, once again, they were outmanned. They were decimated with injuries. Toronto clearly had more talent on the ice than the Montreal Canadiens. And Jake Muzzin throws one at the net just over 6 minutes into period number 2 and deflects off of John Merrill's stick, and it beats Jake Allen. Nothing he can do there. As a matter of fact, I would say that there was nothing that Jake Allen could do on the first, there was nothing he could do on the second, and there was nothing that he can do on the third. At that point, Yoel Armia has a breakaway stopped by Jack Campbell. And a couple of minutes after that, Edmondson to Petrie. Petrie carrying the puck with some speed, with some movement, with a great pass in transition to Nick Suzuki, who enters the offensive blue line with speed, has Hall backing up, uses him as a screen, and he goes up and over Campbell. Is a real good shot. And the Canadiens narrow that lead to 3-1. And at that point, we're thinking, well, we got ourselves a hockey game here, but it wasn't much of a hockey game, to tell you the truth. It almost seemed like it was a scrimmage for the Toronto Maple Leafs. The Canadiens, I thought, really struggled with some facets of their game, one of which was the transition game. Had it not been for Petrie on that goal by Suzuki, you didn't see much of it. I thought the Canadiens had a hard time as well exiting their zone. Phil Deneau was a tough night for him getting with the zone exits. It was a particularly tough night for Shea Weber as well. He had a god-awful time of actually with zone exits for the Montreal Canadiens. And it wasn't easy tonight versus the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's the Sick Podcast. Montrealers, you're tired of going to the gas station? Use Fuel It service, whether you're at home, work, or anywhere in between. Download the Fuel It Canada app today. Fuel It, bringing gas to the 21st century. Speaking of gas, it's another thing that I want to talk about. I thought the Canadiens didn't have a lot of gas in the tank tonight. They really didn't. What were they playing? Their fifth game, I think, in the last 8 days or something like that. And we know that because they had that COVID break, they probably were off for that week or 10 days between games. But once they came back, I mean, they're playing a game every day and a half on average type of thing. And the Canadiens they looked tired. They looked tired from the 3 games and 4 nights that they had played versus the Calgary Flames. They played on Friday. They played on Saturday. They played on Monday. By playing on Wednesday, it's 4 games and 6 nights. I believe it's 5 and 8. And so you're talking about a Toronto Maple Leafs team who I think they've been off now they were off for several days. The last time I think they played the Winnipeg Jets was on Saturday night, if memory serves me well. So Toronto was off on Sunday, off on Monday, off on Tuesday, waiting for the Montreal Canadiens. And so Toronto with more pure talent than the Canadiens. Let's be honest. Canadiens don't have an Austin Matthews. Canadiens don't have a Mitch Marner. Canadiens don't have a John Tavares. And you can make an argument, but the Canadiens probably don't have a talent like William Nylander either. So make it 3 or 4 players that the Canadiens don't have. Those guys came in with a lot of energy. The Leafs, once again, were not decimated with injuries. The Montreal Canadiens are. You add it all up. It just, this was not going to go well. You just knew that the Canadiens were going to be in trouble tonight. And in trouble they were. And now the big thing is, do they have enough gas in the tank? Speaking of Fuel It Canada, do the Canadiens have enough gas in the tank to take them to the end of the season and be able to hang on and make the playoffs? And if they make the playoffs, it's most likely going to be an appointment with these same Toronto Maple Leafs. And I know a lot of people were watching the game on Wednesday night saying, you know what? If Montreal gets into the playoffs, it's not going to last very long, and Toronto's going to destroy them. And you know what? That very, very well may happen. But at the same time, there's a couple of things that we have to keep in mind, okay? And here's the good news. The good news is when the Canadiens end their regular season, they'll have a week before the playoffs start. So it's a week to recharge the batteries. They'll probably get a good 3 days off, and then they'll probably start practicing. And, at that point, they're not heavy-duty practices. You're practicing your special teams. You're fine-tuning a few things. So the Canadiens can get that breather, and they can recharge the batteries at that point, should they get in. You would expect Carey Price, who Dominic Ducharme says is getting better day by day, you would expect that Carey Price will be back. Brendan Gallagher already has been practicing. The cast is off. Brendan Gallagher will be back. We don't know about Byron. We don't know about Tatar. And we don't know about Drouin. But at the very least, what we do know is if the Canadiens make the playoffs, they have a week in between, a week off by the time the playoffs start at the end of the season. They'll have Carey Price back. They'll have Brendan Gallagher back. When Gallagher gets back in the lineup, everyone knows what he brings to a hockey team, right? He's a real gamer. He's got this competitive fire that's contagious, and you're seeing it. You know who has that? Josh Anderson has that. And Anderson tonight, you can just he tried, but unfortunately, it didn't work out for the Canadiens tonight. It's the Sick Podcast. If you go to sportbuffshop.com for all of your officially licensed sports apparel and more, use code SICK15 for 15% off on all of their items. I'm Marinaro. It's the Sick Podcast. Cole Caulfield, I thought it was a little bit difficult for Cole tonight. Hanging out on the perimeter quite a bit. It's been able to not hurt his play at every other level because the one-timer is just so good. The shot is just so good. Real smart player. He knows how to get open. He knows where goals are scored. But in the National Hockey League, I think he's going to have to get in a little bit tighter. So I thought, there was an adjustment to be made in that respect. But, who on the Montreal Canadiens looked good tonight? I would say I thought Jake Evans looked okay. Nick Suzuki obviously scored a big goal. But it was tough for the Canadiens. It was tough. And one of the things I think we're also going to see is John Merrill was a -2 tonight, paired with Romanov, who was also -2. Dominic Ducharme wanted to see what he had in Merrill. He wanted to see what he had in Gustafsson. He's had a chance to see it. And I think it's time that they bring Brett Kulak back in the lineup. So I got to tell you this. I think Kulak's going to be there on Friday night. I think he's a better option right now. Not that he's a better option than Merrill, because I think Merrill has his merits as well. But I think the situation with Merrill and Kulak is, they'll keep one defenseman in as long as he plays well. And if that defenseman doesn't play well, then the other guy is going to get the turn. So I think we're going to see Kulak next game. I thought it was a good game for Joel Edmondson, who had an assist, and he was a +1. I thought it was a good game for Jeff Petrie, who had an assist, and he was +1. Once again, I thought Suzuki was okay. I love the fact that Josh Anderson had 3 shots on goal, and he had 6 hits in this hockey game. Yoel Armia had 3 shots on goal as well. Tyler Toffoli had 7 hits. It's the most I've ever seen him involved, actually, in a hockey game this season in that respect. But the Canadiens just didn't have enough firepower. They didn't have enough horses to go up against the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I don't know how much better it's going to be against the Winnipeg Jets on Friday, but the Canadiens are going to have to hope that they're going to get some bodies back here, because if they're going to be decimated like this without these 5 bodies, it's going to be really, really hard for them to beat a team like the Winnipeg Jets, who I know are going to be, have a couple of injuries as well. And Nick Ehlers is out for the rest of the regular season and stuff like that. But man, they are really going to sweat it out. You know what the good thing is, as we try and find somewhat of a silver lining, is sometimes when you coast into the playoffs, you're not playing playoff games. And so when the playoffs start, you got away from you're probably not used to the tempo and used to the playoffs, because you got away from playoff hockey for a while because you had solidified your spot. You gave guys a night off. And ideally, don't get me wrong, ideal situation, the Canadiens win the next 3-4 games here, try and distance themselves, clinch a playoff spot, rest Shea Weber, who's going to be 36 in August, rest Jeff Petrie, who's going to be 34 in December. Both of them they play 22 to 23 minutes a game. Rest Corey Perry, rest Eric Stahl, That's the ideal situation. But at the same time, because it's tight around the collar, because it's going to come down right to the end to find out if the Canadiens are going to make the playoffs, the advantage that you have at least is that every game is a playoff game. Every game is a 4-point game. And so you're going to know when the playoffs start, if you're in it, you're going to know what it means to play in tight hockey games, to play in 4-point games, because they're playing in them right now. And that, I think, is the silver lining. I can't really find more than that, to tell you the truth, is that if they make the playoffs, once again, they'll have a week off in between games. Guys can rest then. If they win the next couple of games, maybe you rest a couple of guys. Folks, I'll tell you this, though. If the Canadiens get their guys back, if they get their players back, and they have that rest that we just talked about, I think the Canadiens are closer to being the team that they were. I think the Canadiens are closer to being the team that they were in the first month and a half of the season than the Canadiens have been in the last month and a half of the season. The last month and a half of the season has been injuries, has been fatigue, has been condensed schedule. The first month of the season, first month and a half, you saw what the Canadiens were able to do with a healthy lineup, a 10-day camp, everyone fresh. So if they can get back to that, I think you're going to see a much more competitive Canadiens team. It wouldn't shock me if they beat the Toronto Maple Leafs. I wouldn't bet on it. I think Toronto's got the best chance of coming out of the division. But we know, listen, playoff hockey is different hockey. And the Montreal Canadiens, for several seasons, have been built for the regular season and not built for the playoffs. This might actually be one of those years when you take a look at the veterans and the pairing of Weber and Sherrod and the pairing of Edmondson and Petrie and the fact that they added Eric Stahl and the fact that they added Corey Perry and you make that deal for Josh Anderson and you sign Tyler Toffoli as an unrestricted free. Don't forget, the Canadiens have this year, they have several players that were on a team that won the Stanley Cup. They haven't had that in a long time. So it leads me to believe that the Canadiens, if they get in, and I still believe they will, it won't be easy though, but if they get in, I believe the Canadiens will be a better playoff team than they were a regular season team in the last month and a half of the season. Until we do this again next time, I'm Marinaro, reminding all of you that you are listening to and watching the Sick Podcast. You can listen to it on all social media platforms, and you can follow us and watch us on Facebook and on Instagram at the Sick Podcast. Canadiens and the Winnipeg Jets, Friday night. Canadiens and the Ottawa Senators, Saturday night. Both games at the Bell Center. I'll check back in a couple of days and talk about those games. Until then, I'm Marinaro, the Sick Podcast.